And Syria is also likely to dominate things again on the second day of the talks in Northern Ireland, with the consensus between nations more pressing than ever. Let's go more on where they all stand now. Joining me from the city of Portland on the U.S. West Coast is Peter Bechtold. He's director of the Middle East Studies Center at Portland University and an expert on the region. Peter, what do you make of the talks between Putin and Obama?
Well, what has been reported so far is quite predictable. I don't see that Putin and Russia are going to relent on their position, which is that they support the legitimate government of Syria, and that President Obama and his Western allies, especially France and Great Britain, will back off too far from their position, which is that they want to support the rebels. So we are stuck.
Well, we are stuck. Let me ask you, Richard Bestick makes a really important point in his story that he just reported from Northern Ireland, that you've got these powerful leaders and they appear powerless to do anything about this. And we've seen that with the UN as well. What's it going to take to break through this and actually come up with something where they can kind of coalesce around and maybe forge an agreement?
Well, there's sort of two things that needed to be pointed out. One is that everybody agrees that they want to stop, if possible, or at least reduce the violence, which is, of course, a noble goal. But the real problem is the framing of the issue. President Obama boxed himself in last August when he said that the use of chemical weapons would be a red line, and now a report surfaced, that's all it really is, that chemical weapons were used. And so he is being pushed to, quote unquote, do something. But not many people around the world agree with that report. Most people believe that there's domestic pressure on President Obama from Congress and from certain interest groups in the United States to become more active. And he doesn't have many options, frankly.
Well, one of the options that's been discussed, and there's been a lot of people who have been critical of this as an option, is the no-fly zone. They say that this is a very different picture than Libya. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm quite familiar with Syria, having been there in 3 different decades. And what the audience needs to understand is that Libya is a wide open desert country, often cloudless skies, whereas in Syria you have many small villages side by side, Christian villages, Muslim villages, among the Muslims, Sunni and Shia villages. And so one cannot simply move in and say, here is an area where we can establish a beachhead, or we can establish a military presence, which would be required in order to have a no-fly zone. And so this would be technically very difficult, and from the reports that I've seen, the Pentagon is not happy with the idea of having a no-fly zone over Syria.
Peter,
and neither is Russia.
Well, Peter, let me ask you this. If these world leaders were to sit down with you and pick your brains, since you're familiar with the area, you've lived there, you've been in the area, and they were to ask you for advice, what advice would you give them?
Well, the first thing is you have to frame the problem as you do any problem always in life. And the difficulty is that there are 4 tiers. One of them is dictatorship against rebels. But the other one, the more significant one, is minority rule against majority opposition. And the third one is that the countries in the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and now Jordan, are Sunni-led countries, and they have positioned themselves on the side of the Sunni rebels. Whereas the government is backed by the Christians, by the Shiites, and the offshoot, the Alawites, and the Druze, as well as previously at least the Kurds. And so you have a government that has protected the minorities in a system of the Ba'ath Party that is a complete separation of state and religion, what here is called church and state, or church and politics. And it is very difficult to see how a Sunni-led government would respect that. And so the people who are currently being backed by the Western powers are driven by a religious ideology, both inside Syria and by the nations that support them. And we claim, Secretary of State Kerry, the British Foreign Secretary Haig, they all say that they want a government that is committed to democracy. But it is not clear how you can get there short of a successful Geneva conference where all the parties are present, domestic and international. And so far, we don't have agreements on that.
Peter Bechtold joining us from Portland, Oregon. Thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.